Call the roll.
Regent Bartel. Regent Bradley.
Here.
Regent Burmaster. Regent Conley Kiesler. Here. Regent Crane. Here. Regent Keane. Here. Davis. Regent Loftus. Regent McCutcheon. Regent Pruitt.
Here.
Randall.
Here.
Regent Rosenzweig. Here. Collins. Regent Seminis.
Here.
Regent Shields.
Here. Here.
Regent Spector.
You have 2 years to realize this is here.
Quorum is present.
Marcel is here from Arizona.
Okay. From Arizona.
You near the pool, or?
On the patio. I tried to hear you.
The minutes of the December 8th, 2006 meeting has been distributed. Are there any additions or corrections? Move to approve. We have motion, second. Second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Approved. A quick report of the President. On February 1 and 2, I appeared at the Association of Governing Boards annual convention that dealt mainly with foundation fiduciary responsibilities over foundations, and I spoke on a panel. And I bring this up because I was very impressed with the overall reaction to not only the University of Wisconsin system governance, but also the University of Wisconsin Foundation, University of Wisconsin Madison Foundation, which is clearly a leader amongst the foundations in the country. We also had dinner with the Big Ten group of foundations, and it was clear that they were looking for leadership from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And we have much to be proud of there, not just in their development skills, but the transparency, their independence, and their openness to, and one of the issues was how do they remain independent such that they can still operate efficiently, and how do we at the same time exercise our responsibilities under the auspices, or at least the umbrella issues of Sarbanes-Oxley. And at the end of the day, I'd like to report back that I think we're in very good stead there, not only what we do, but more important, the perception of the system, and that foundation was outstanding. On the 6th of February, Pat Brady and I met with Attorney General J.B. Van Halleran because he is our attorney, and it was an excellent meeting. We met with his staff, went over some of the issues, and talked about our communications. We are one of their biggest consumers of legal services, maybe second to Department of Corrections. They pointed that out. They pointed that out. And of course, we did have our hearing around the state, and I'd like to thank David Drew and his staff. They did an excellent job. We couldn't have done that without some hard work, and it was very important to have that input. And I think it's one of the first times we've ever reached out that far and received that much input, and it went very well. And finally, I've spent the last 2 months negotiating with President Riley with the governor's office the budget. It'll be announced on Tuesday. I think you've seen some of the initiatives that will be supported, but this has not been easy, and it's not easy because the economy is not in great shape. But needless to say, we made our pitch, and I'm pleased to say that the governor of the state of Wisconsin still thinks higher education is the solution and not the problem. Having said that, I'll move on to the report of the January 19th, 2007 meeting of the Educational Communications Board. A written report has been provided. Are there any questions or comments? The board's representative is Regent Conley Kiesler. Seeing none, we'll move on to the report of the January 23, 2007 meeting of the Wisconsin Technical College System Board. A written report has been provided. Are there any questions or comments? The board's representatives are Regents Burmaster, Keene, Rosenzweig, and Smith. And a report of the February 7, 2007 meeting of the Hospital Authority Board has been provided. Are there any questions or comments? The board's representatives are Regents McCutcheon, Rosenzweig, and Smith. this time, I would turn over to the president of the Utica system.
Thank you, President Walsh. We will begin today with a presentation from our host campus, UW-Madison. Let me remind folks of the wonderful dinner that Chancellor Wiley sponsored in the November meeting at the Cole Center, where we had the privilege of listening to some young musicians from the Madison campus. Madison was really hosting that meeting, but the agenda was so packed that John and his colleagues graciously agreed to wait till now to do their presentation, which they would normally do when they are hosting campus. So I see that the provost, Pat Farrell, has just walked in, and he will do the Madison presentation that we've scheduled for this morning as the host campus. So Provost Farrell, the floor is yours if you're ready. Okay.
Thanks for the introduction and the opportunity to tell you a little bit more about Madison. I suspect most of you already know quite a bit. Let me start off. I've been urged by a number of my colleagues to give a little context, not so much about Madison, but about me, so that in a sense you get you have some better idea of where I'm coming from. So my background, as maybe a few of you know, I've been here in Madison about 25 years. Have degrees from University of Michigan and UC Berkeley. I've been on the faculty in mechanical engineering all that time. Like most faculty here, both researcher and teaching. Research field is in combustion. I tend to work with a research group. Our group collectively has had about $4 or so million a year research for the past 20-some years, so that ends up to $80 to $100 million over the past 25 years, which to my mind is a lot of money. About 25 PhD students finished, over 100 publications. You sort of lose count after a while. About 12, 15 years ago, in addition to sort of my normal roles as researcher and teaching the classroom, I got very interested in faculty development. And in particular, there were a couple of activities on campus which were just beginning at the time, which I and some of my colleagues found really fascinating. These were focused less on how do you do better teaching, well actually they were focused on that for about 2 weeks. And then the faculty decided this was not nearly as interesting as focusing on how do you do better learning. And the reason that was a lot more interesting is because it allowed us to understand more about how our students would learn. And it was pretty easy to translate how our students learn and asking ourselves questions. So what exactly are we doing in the classroom? So for a fairly extended period of time then, I had been involved in turning that into an actual on-campus activity. It was funded for a while by IBM, then FIPSI, which is part of the Department of Education, then by the Provost's office. And as a result, we've had this program in place now for about 15 years. And my point in saying that is that while I may or may not be your typical faculty, Madison faculty member, I'm not that unusual in having a responsibility and interest in doing research, but also responsibility and a great interest in teaching, learning, how do we work with our students, not necessarily drawing a big distinction between undergraduate and graduate students, but these are the kinds of things we worry about. So what I want to talk about today is what I'm calling here an update. And it isn't really an update in the sense of here's all the latest news from Madison. I think you get enough of that in the paper. You have a little handout here that you'll see as sort of an update. So what I want to talk about is something slightly different, and that is a little bit more of a higher level perspective on teaching and research at UW-Madison, how we look at that, how we try to develop that, why I think that's a pretty important perspective, thinking about higher education in the present and what we can do for our students going forward. So that's what I want to talk about. Leave some time at the end. Alan is going to tell you a little bit more about new facilities on campus and sort of some perspective on facilities. And hopefully at the end of that, you'll at least have a very broad idea of some of the things we're thinking about here in Madison. Okay, how do I take down this? There we go. This is not news. This is the mission that we put in our strategic plan. in case you were unaware or forgotten, I thought I'd better put this up here. This is what we're still operating on. I'll mention in a few minutes what's next for strategic planning, but at least to see. This is what we think we're trying to do. But now I want to talk a little bit more about exactly how we think we're going to do that. These are things I think you already know. We're listed as a very high research activity. That's the Carnegie designation for institutions with the volume of research activity that we have. Numbers, I'm sure you're not surprised, about 29,000 undergrads, 9,000, sometimes 10,000 grad students, professional students, and so on. A fairly large number of what we call non-traditional. These would be students who either are enrolled in degree programs but are not on campus, or take not-for-credit courses or other courses off campus that are not necessarily intended to get a degree at all, but take advantage of the expertise of our faculty and the opportunity to be continuous learners. And we have about 2,200 faculty. I note here 1,800 non-med school, because if you compare, for example, similar Big Ten or the 12 that we are normally compared to, some have med schools, some do not. And when you count med schools, how people count faculty varies. For comparison, amongst the 12, I think most of you know the 12 institutions that we are normally compared against. We're the 6th largest in terms of student headcount. We're about the 9th largest in terms of faculty. And you'll see in a couple of minutes, we're, of those, about the 1st or 2nd largest in terms of research activity, both industrial and federal. Again, this is something I think you know pretty well since you just did budgeting last December. So you can look at any column you want. Way on the right-hand side, which is a little bit chopped off there, is this past year's budget, so about $2.2 billion for Madison. You can see below that the little pie chart that shows where the money comes from. And of course, this doesn't show where the money goes to, so this is gross revenue, not net. Meaning, for example, you see 1% state labs. That doesn't mean we make a profit on state labs. That just means that income comes from state labs, and at least that much gets spent on state labs, state lab hygiene, for example. Again, this is not news to you. Looking at the GPR slice, 12%, the tuition slice, 15%. You'll notice gifts and grants, which we are very reliant on. That's a bigger slice than either tuition or GPR, smaller than the two of them put together, of course. And federal, which is largely grants, and so on. Auxiliaries typically is things like student housing, other activities that we do as a university that are meant to be neither profit centers nor loss centers, but break even, but nonetheless they show up here in terms of budget. So this is what I really want to talk about a little bit about, is integrating teaching and learning, and what that does, what that means in terms of a culture. I could spend probably more time than you care to listen on this particular slide, but that culture, teaching and research, affects virtually everything. In particular, it affects who's here, and the who is faculty, staff, and students. They choose to come for a variety of reasons, but almost all of them, one way or another, get wrapped back into this notion of teaching and research culture that exists. Why they stay, why they might not stay, what they came for, all of these things, again, are wrapped around this notion of teaching and research culture. In particular, I can pick on one group, which is the faculty, because they're the easiest to identify why they come, why they stay, and why they might not. But I'll just pick on one of those, the why they come. As you probably know, when we recruit, we typically, most of the people we recruit have multiple offers. It's rare that we will talk to anybody who doesn't have several other offers in hand from competitive institutions. It's also rare that we are the top dollar offer. We almost never are. It's rare that we offer the largest startup package. We almost never do. Nonetheless, we get a fairly sizable percentage of the people that we want. How does that happen? It's back to this. The teaching and research culture that exists on this campus is an enormous attractor. People come, they see, they look at who their colleagues might be, how their colleagues on this campus work, what really seems to be the driving force for success on this campus, what is it that we recognize, that we praise, that we acknowledge, and a surprisingly large number, maybe not to you, but to some people, a surprisingly large number of prospective faculty say, that's a place I want to be. That's a place I think I can be successful. So we do well in hiring. Sometimes it's more of a challenge in retention. Once our new faculty in particular come have become successful. As I think you've heard before from others from Madison, we are looked upon by many in the nation as a terrific farm team. We're great at picking young prospects. We're terrific at nurturing them, getting them going, mentoring them, having them become successful, and then we're ripe for the picking. So for us, the challenge is to not be quite so ripe for the picking, and make sure that by the time our faculty get tenure and are really in the middle of their career, when they're really successful, that they can't even think of going anyplace else. So I'll skip on, but this who and what they do and what happens here is really a critical part of building, changing, maintaining that culture, and a critical part of our future success. But I want to get on to some other things. There we go. In particular this, in the next few slides. Again, I apologize if I'm telling you things you already know, but what I want to do is connect research, which many of us tend to think is sort of esoteric, work in a lab, doesn't have much to do with reality, to, in fact, the reality that we're educating our students, even our undergraduates, even our freshmen, the reality we're educating them for, to be able to provide the kind of performance we hope they will when they leave 10 years from now, 20 years from now, when they're in the middle of their careers. So that's why I'm picking on this. As you know, research is all about applying fundamental knowledge. So building new understanding, putting that to work, creating that in combination with old understandings to solve new problems. If you're from the educational world, this Bloom's taxonomy may be familiar to you. It's a way of characterizing levels of learning, from rote learning all the way to in-depth learning that you can apply to a completely different situation and yet take advantage of learning from some other context. And my point here is that Bloom's taxonomy comes almost strictly from educational literature, but it follows almost exactly how research works. So my point here is to emphasize the next two bullets. How do we develop these new understandings? This is not exclusive to people working in laboratory. This is exactly what we want from every one of our undergraduates. Because the problems that we will ask them to solve, we all will ask them to solve 10 years from now. Most of them, we don't even know what they are. We haven't articulated them clearly, or if we have, we've conveniently ignored them. But they're out there. So sending undergraduates out with a thorough knowledge of yesterday's news is not serving them very well. In particular, sending them out with a thorough knowledge of yesterday's news and no real idea of how do I learn new things that none of my professors knew and put those to work is also not a service. So to us, this is critical. We need students who have a good understanding of foundational information, but more important than anything else, have a good understanding of how to add to that, build on it, and tackle issues that, as I say right now, most of us don't even know are issues, but are going to be ones that are dominant issues 10 or 20 years from now. So, as I said, this is a foundational view, but to us it's pretty important, and it permeates almost everything we do in Madison. So why are having research faculty in the classroom, why is that valuable? Because this is how they think, this is how they teach, this is how they talk, and this is how they want their students to think, teach, talk, learn. And that transmission is really important. So here's a few features that you may or may not have thought of before. Again, the idea here is projecting into the future. So here's one of my first bullet. Inductive rather than deductive organization of knowledge. What am I talking about? Well, most of you are familiar with deductive knowledge. This is what's in a textbook. Someone has very conveniently for us organized knowledge about, you name a topic, math, physics, psychology, whatever. Some very smart people have figured out how to organize this in a way that makes sense, that's easy to transmit, and looks like it fits in some well-understood pattern. This is a great thing, but that's not how people learn. How people tend to learn is much more inductive. I tried this. That didn't work. Well, I tried this other thing. Well, that worked. Is there some common thread between what worked and what didn't work? That's also how new knowledge is created. It's rarely deductive. It's almost always inductive. Here's the things I know. How do I build a model of the world that's consistent with the things I know or the things I just learned? So my point here is that one of the things we need to provide, help our students learn, is not just deductive thinking, not just how to read the textbook. That's a commodity product. With all the hidden meanings that commodity products, that phrase means, that's what I mean. That's a commodity product, reading the textbook. Inductive reasoning is not a commodity product. That's difficult, that's challenging, that's unusual, that's something special. That's something we need to have our students walk out of here with, because we expect them to be all those things, unusual, special. The second of my bullets is to emphasize that knowledge is dynamic. What we were all certain of 20 years ago, some of that is now uncertain, some of that is completely wrong, some of it has been reaffirmed and turns out to be true. So for all of us, that's a continuing challenge. How do I reassess what I thought I knew for certain and be open to the idea, well, okay, maybe that isn't quite so certain. And some things that I thought I knew for certain, and in fact, those are true. So knowledge is dynamic. What's true today, as I say, may not be true tomorrow. Lifelong learning is essential. You can all imagine, if you like, underlying this is the phrase that you hear so much, that we live in this information age. So one way to think about this is information is a commodity. You can go online and get lots of information. Some of it's right, some of it's wrong, some of it's useful, some of it's useless, but you can get it all. So the person who owns information doesn't have much of value. The person who can put information together to make meaning, that's value. How do our students learn this? How do you learn anything else? Practice. You have to work on learning how to do this with guidance, with experience, with people who have done it before, with people who know how to best extract that from students. So in our case, this kind of thinking, this kind of pushing students to think beyond what's the information in the textbook and can you tell me what the textbook told you, to how do you learn new things from the textbook, from your own experience, and how do you apply those to some problem that neither you nor I have ever seen before, nor do we actually know what the solution looks like, and in some cases we're not entirely sure what the question is. But that's real, and that's what we look for. That's what we see in this combination of teaching and research. I think those of you who were here last year saw some examples of how that's carried out in Madison when Gina Sapiro presented the suite of what we call academic enhancement programs that we have available on campus. I'm not going to talk about those, but that's one example of how students really can take advantage of what's available in Madison and really push the limits of what we might call conventional classroom experience to an out-of-classroom experience, to get it as complete understanding and an opportunity, as the first line says, to practice. So a key question that we always ask ourselves is, so this all sounds really good. How do you know if it actually happens? What do you look at? What are the metrics? What are the ways in which you decide, yeah, this is really working, or no, it's not? And for us, that's pretty important. So here's some examples. This is far from complete, so I'll go through fairly quickly, but you can think of your own. So some examples are noted here that there are complementary, not competitive views on research and teaching. That is, those are not seen as alternative ways to spend your time. In fact, they tend to be pretty integrated for most faculty. They aren't that different. For students, we can watch what they do. I had a little film clip which we didn't quite get organized here, but most of you have probably seen it before. This is a film clip they've shown at the halftime basketball games. It's about 30 seconds long, and it boasts a little bit for UW-Madison about a place which is #1 in providing Peace Corps volunteers. Of course, now we have to change that because now we're #2. University of Washington passed this up, but we'll see what happens next year. Also comments on UW-Madison having the largest number of S&P 500 CEOs. The point of showing the clip at the beginning and what I'll mention here is these are two inexact qualitative measures of outcomes. Outcomes matter. What our students do matters. What they do when they leave matters. And that's a pretty good measure, although again anecdotal, of what happens while they're here. So, more hallmarks of excellence. Some examples here, again, you might be familiar with these, that we are very active in large-scale educational programs. What I mean by that is large-scale research programs. I named a few of them here. Most of these are NSF funded. So National Institutes of Science Education, SCALE, CERTL, these are all programs which are research-based educational programs to figure out how do we teach better, how do we learn better, both at the university as well as in K-12. We are, I think, one of the highest providers of NIH, National Institutes of Health traineeships. These are traineeships that are awarded for support of graduate students. They get awarded for places that actually produce quality graduates. So there's a reason that they come here. The traineeships come here. It is because we have a strong record of educating graduate students, getting them through their advanced degrees. They go out and they go to work, and they're productive contributors to, in this case, the health field. And of course, the easiest one to measure is that we have a successful research program. I'll show you a few markers, but they're not the only markers. I'm going to show just a sample of attributes or elements that we look at. Some of these are in the handout that you have, some are not. Here's one, is how do we know what goes on? This is graduation rates. I don't have this past year's on there, so that little dip at the end actually tips back up again. So we're at the order of 80%. This is 6-year graduation rate, meaning freshmen who come to us that graduate in 6 years from UW-Madison. I think most of you heard yesterday that there's a number of the students who leave that we can track, and there's a number of students who leave that we can't. So I can't tell you what the graduation rate overall from anywhere is. And you can see the time to degree is in red. Other measures we track to see how well we're doing in terms of the kinds of education within this teaching and research culture that we're after. Here's one. Again, I don't have this past falls on here, the fall 2006. But if it was here, that the minority enrollment for the freshman class of fall 2006 is about 14%. So it's a significant jump over the last dip you see there. Faculty and staff, again, you can see up through last year. These are markers that we use. I'll show you a few more. We can see more of these later if you want to. We often count dollars when we're looking at research success. I need to emphasize, though, that dollars is not in itself a particularly good measure of research success. There's a big chunk of our campus, perhaps a third, for whom research dollars is not a good indicator. Most people in the humanities, many in the social sciences, there aren't big grants to be competed for. There's not big money out there. They are nevertheless active researchers. So the fact that we count dollars because dollars are easy to count is not necessarily a complete indicator of research activity, but it is an indicator. And as I say, there's always a temptation to count stuff that's easy to count. And this is relatively easy to count. So you can see those have increased. Here we conveniently left off 2006 because if you saw 2006, you would see a decrease. The competition is stiff. I don't want to belabor the point, but let me emphasize that you're looking at about $900 million a year in research money. Hit rate on NSF grants is about 1 in 10, meaning if it was completely random, I got to write 10 grants for the chance to get one funded. NIH is slightly better, but not a lot. There are a lot of institutions which have very bright faculty writing very good grants with very good ideas. This is not simple. This is basically starting over every year and recreating a $800 or $900 million business. And that's a challenge. Some examples of how does this get out into the general public. Here's one. Again, this is not the only, but it's an indicator. Patents and licensing. These are ideas that our faculty have generated that have been patented, and there is some licensing income, typically through WARF. Not a lot, but some. But this is one example of how some research gets out into the general public. This I go through fairly quickly if you care. This is where the money comes from over a span of about 9 years. You can see how it's shifted. We are almost 50% HHS, Health and Human Services, and federal government. That's mostly NIH funding. NSF is 28%. We are now the largest recipient of NSF grant money of public institutions. That may change next year. All these are subject to change next year. It depends how successful our faculty are at writing proposals and getting them funded. But that's where we are now. Non-federal awards, if you went back to my pie from about 10 slides ago, this is an ever-growing piece of our portfolio, meaning we rely more and more on non-federal sources for research. These are, you can see the pieces, WARF, UW Foundation. Much of the UW Foundation money is actually not from the foundation, but that's how money from many industries gets funneled to us. For example, my research group we're in the 4th year of a 5-year, $1 million a year grant from General Motors. If any of you have written proposals to private companies, in this case public companies, getting them to part with cash is very, very difficult. Because there's huge constituencies inside of GM who say, why are you sending money to Wisconsin? Give it to us. We'll do the work. But in this case, in the GM case, they didn't have an open competition. They decided as they were downsizing their internal research labs and wanted access to fundamental research, they were going to pick 6 key areas for the future of their company. They were going to go do their own due diligence and pick 6 institutions, 1 in each field, that they thought were the leaders in those fields and would give them access to the fundamental research they needed. So for electronics, they picked Carnegie Mellon. For some elements of manufacturing, they picked Aachen in Germany. For engines and powertrains, they picked Wisconsin. After that, it was negotiated. And as you can imagine, a big part of the negotiation is all about IP. We won't go there, but for us, if you want to think of issues for the future, intellectual property, as we become more reliant on industrial funding, will be a bigger and bigger issue. If you like ranking, here's a ranking. Amongst publics, at least in 2004. Or if you don't like ranking, you don't have to look at it. R&D expenditures for Big Ten were 3rd. We're always, of course, a little grumpy about this because a few of the people ahead of us have big pass-throughs. Pass-through is, for example, when they are the titular home of, for example, a federal laboratory, but they actually don't do any of the work on their campus, but it adds to their total. We don't do, as far as I know, we have no pass-throughs. So the money you see here is actually spent on this campus. Okay. I'm going to wrap up here quickly and then let Alan talk a little bit. So a key question, or a couple key questions are how do we retain the position where we are? And actually, as a relatively new provost, that's not a very satisfactory question. To me, a much better question is how do we get better? Remaining in place is, from my view, that's not a goal. That's not a place we want to be. We understand we have challenges, budgetary, other issues. But aiming to not fall behind is a terrible place to begin, and we have no intention of beginning there. Nonetheless, you can see that we can forecast exactly what higher education in UW-Madison, where we should be in the next 10 years. And one of the ways we're doing this is our own reaccreditation process. I think you're going to hear about it if you haven't already. A number of the other campuses in the system have been through reaccreditation recently. We are 2 years away from actually having a visit. We're choosing to use this not simply to do the paperwork, but as a way to get the campus engaged in a discussion of what should UW-Madison look like 10 years from now. And depending on what it should look like, we should start today, because it's not going to change overnight. But we need to start moving in that direction. Hopefully that'll be a pretty stimulating discussion, and we're looking for a lot of creative ideas from both within and outside of our campus. So let me, get one more here. So this is my last accountability and assessment. I have to raise this issue because, as most of you know, this is a growing topic on the national scene for higher education. We think we're already pretty engaged, but I would be remiss or inaccurate if I said we assess everything that we do, or we are able to be transparently accountable for everything that we use. Nonetheless, I just wanted to mention that we do have a number of different levels of assessment in place, some of them new, some of them old, and we're continually looking at ways that we can improve our own assessment as well as our accountability for how we use resources, for what the expectations are of us, from the public, from you, from the nation, really, since we see ourselves not just as service of the state, but service of the nation. Major challenges. I don't have much time. You already probably have a pretty good idea what our challenges are. I'll paint them in very broad pictures. The environment is changing around us, the environment for higher education, what people expect of us. The admissions discussion is a good example, particularly for us, the admissions discussion around you only have 5,600 freshman seats and you got 23, probably this year 24,000 applicants for those 5,600 freshman seats. There's an aspiration that's pretty blatant for UW-Madison. But there's others. Are we an economic engine for the state? Are we a source of human capital for the state and the nation? There's a whole host of aspirations that 20 years ago weren't there or were expressed in a different way. 10 years from now, there will be new aspirations that will still be expressed in a different way. One of our challenges is to try to anticipate what those will be, so we're there when those aspirations are voiced. Changes in students, this is obvious and fun. Students are always different. Every year, every generation, they're different. They come with different skills, different interests, different abilities. That's a challenge for us. We have to meet students where they are, not where we wish they were. And yet, the output, what comes out when they graduate, they walk across the stage, we have expectations that are not quite so changeable. So a challenge for us is to match what comes in with what we expect when they leave. And clearly change the faculty and staff. I think you've heard plenty about that in the past. So I'm going to stop and ask Alan to talk a little bit about research facilities.
It's been said that if, as a campus, we were going to exchange our mascot from Bucky Badger, the logical alternative would be to make it a tower crane. That, of course, is never going to happen. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, it's not always been the case here on this campus. In the last 15 years, we've made some significant investments in our research capacity for facilities on that standpoint. What I'm handing out is just a summary budget of 15 years of investment. And I think the important part here is the real change occurred in about 1990, 1991 when Chancellor Shalala was frustrated with the pace of which this campus was reinventing itself physically and from a facility standpoint. We've been building about one building every biennium, 100% paid for by taxpayer GPR money. And that clearly wasn't meeting our needs. So she had a conversation with the governor and the legislature and the UW Foundation and basically put together a whole new approach for supporting especially research funding. And that was, we'll now partner in financing these facilities. So on the chart you can see that I've handed out, if you just work your way down to the bottom, in the last 15 years and over the next 2 to 3 years as we're wrapping up these projects, we will have invested $860 million in research facilities on campus. And of that amount, $530 million was raised by the campus, either from federal grants, from individual gifts, or from program revenue or segregated fees that support those items. So less than 40% of the money came from the state. And that's been the partnership that we have developed over time. It's been executed in a number of packages. You can see them in kind of chronological order. And they have had different focuses over time. When this partnership started in the early 1990s, we focused on a program called WISTAR, which was really meant to reinvest in departmental facilities. And then we moved into HealthStar, BioStar, and then as we did the Institutes for Discovery, we figured out a way to name something that didn't have star in it, which was a big breakthrough for us. And as a result, you can see these cumulative effects. WISTAR was the first project collection, and really there you're talking about individual colleges. So we made investments in research for engineering, research for agriculture, research for life sciences, research for biology, and we were specific to support individual departments. Over time, that has fundamentally changed in not only how we think about research, but how we build buildings for research. So the next wave was HealthStar, and there we were really focusing on reconsolidating both the pharmacy school, the medical school, the Weizmann Center, and the nursing school, all in a cluster of buildings around UW Hospital. So we're following the NIH roadmap for research, which means we have our medical education, we have our medical research, and we have our clinical trials in the hospital, all literally in the same block of the West Campus. So that allows a tremendous amount of integration. And that was another major change in how we've been doing business over time. So now we've collected all of those as part of that investment, and we'll be wrapping up the medical research piece that's under construction today, and will be open in about a year. BioStar was yet another step in our consolidation approach. Now we're not only consolidating like departments, but we're crossing different colleges, and we're bringing bioscience programs together in a biotechnology edition, a microbial science project that is just going to finish in the next year, and then biochemistry, which is under planning right now, which will start in about a year. All of these projects now are taking, for example, medical microbiology, food toxicology, and bacteriology, and putting them all in one building, so that the researchers, the undergraduate and the graduate students are all rubbing shoulders with each other, once again starting to break down some of those traditional academic and research barriers that were set up. And then finally, this whole arc has come to a complete change with the Institutes for Discovery, which we've talked to you about as recently as last year, and that we're in planning and design for now. This goes beyond, this is a building that doesn't have any department. This is really a problem-solving research facility where teams of researchers from a variety of disciplines will go and work on bio and medical issues one by one, as opposed to departmental research. So this is really designed to aggressively go after grants, also look at technology transfer, and by having both a public and a private institute in the same building, we have much more flexibility to go after unique grants and grants that might involve some private investment, some technology transfer immediately as part of that research. So we've kind of gone through this whole arc. This is a quick map of where all those buildings are, and you can see out on the west side around the hospital in the green spaces, that's all the Health Star buildings that we've built around the hospital to create that health sciences, education, research, and clinical care cluster. And then a lot of the others have been focused in Central Campus, where our biology, our College of Agriculture, and those investments have been made. So these are the pictures of the buildings that some of the buildings we worked on for Wistar, Health Star. These are the cluster of buildings out around the hospital. You can see how in the upper left-hand corner, all of what used to be a parking lot around the hospital is now filled with research and education buildings. And part of that plan gets that physical connection between health science education, research, and the hospital itself. The BioStar buildings are here, both underway and in planning. And then the Institute for Discovery, kind of a centerpiece for interdisciplinary study in the central part of campus, that now, because the students have passed a segregated fee to build the new Union South, we're actually rebuilding both of them together so that we have a new research facility, and then the meeting rooms and guest rooms and food service and parking to support that research across the street in New Union South. So it really transformational for the campus. And then finally, we have an overview that by completing a campus master plan a little over a year ago, now we take all these science and research projects and we put them in a design context. I just ended myself. Maybe this is some sort of signal. And it also gives us scheduling, a site capacity, and then we connect it with utilities, transportation, and open space. I think the bottom line for us is, while we have made a significant research investment this way by a partnership in raising funds and using federal grants and then matching it with state money, at the same time it has really enabled us and our researchers to compete in a growing and competitive area, as the provost mentioned. And I'll wrap up with there, and I guess if you have questions for either of us, we're happy to take them.
Thank you, Al. Thank you, Pat. Questions from board members? Yes, Regent Davis.
Ask Provost Barrow, did I read correctly that the average time to graduation was 4.17 years for a significant majority of...
That's the mean. So,
Wow. Okay.
and as you can imagine, it varies across the campus depending on majors. But for example, in LMS, which is of course where most of our students graduate, the average time to graduation is actually lower than that, and the number of credits to graduation is just barely over 120. So those students graduate on time and are well advised. They don't take a lot of credits that they don't need. If we go to engineering, the time is longer, more credits. The engineers typically, it's not so much that they choose poorly, it's that they don't want to leave the campus before they've had a chance to take some non-engineering courses. And often They want to stay another semester, take art history, take something that's not engineering. So they're here for an extra semester at least.
Thank you.
Regent Pruitt.
I just was curious as to any thoughts you had on how important graduate students are to this whole teaching and research mission of the university, and specifically, I guess, what do you think are the 2 or 3 kind of biggest challenges you're facing in the Madison campus in terms of kind of the future of graduate education?
Well, this may sound like almost too mild a statement. Graduate students are vital. I sort of showed you the $900 million or so in research dollars that come in. The vast majority of that money goes for people. It's not stuff, it's people. And a big part of the people is the graduate students. So in most fields, graduate students and postdocs are the ones who are actually doing the research work. People like me, advisors of graduate students, the students get nervous when I come in the laboratory. They don't want me around because I'm going to screw something up. So the students are the ones who do the work. Getting great graduate students is critical to maintain the prestige, the reputation, and the quality of what we produce in research. So what are the challenges? Well, let me arbitrarily break the campus into 2 pieces. So one piece is we have the piece that generates funding, that has NIH grants, NSF grants, and so on. For them, a challenge is simply meeting the payroll. That's, again, from a faculty member standpoint, that's one of my challenges every year, is I've got 7 or 8 faculty, I've got a $200,000 or $300,000 payroll I need to meet this year, and I have an obligation to those students, and I've got to find the money because they're continuing, and that's part of my job, is to make sure I can support them. So that's a challenge for funded students, is on the faculty side to continue to be able to raise the external research money to keep these students going. They can work through their programs, they can graduate and move on. Programs that have strong history of good funding can get good students, because students, when they're coming, that's what they look at. They want to know, well, is the likelihood that you'll be able to support me? A typical PhD in the sciences might be 5 years. Is there 5 years worth of support, or at least the likelihood of that? If there isn't, the best students will go elsewhere. We'll compete for students with anybody across the country, around the world. Some we get, some we don't, but we compete for graduate students. So having the ability to support them, not lavishly, our stipends are not particularly big, but enough so they can pay the rent and pay for food. That's pretty important. On the other side of campus, largely humanities, the arts, and so on, where there's still a lot of research going on, their ability to support graduate students is substantially reduced. They don't have an opportunity to even compete for these external funding sources. So for them, just getting dollars of any sort, any color, any type, to be able to support students is a real challenge. Now, unfortunately, we've made it a little bit tougher by balancing our books more clearly over the past year in terms of how we have graduate students and supported graduate students pay tuition. And that has not helped the situation. It's made us balance our books a little better. So I would say in terms of getting graduate students, probably the biggest challenge we have are reliable, long-term funding. If we have those in place, we've got faculty who will attract students. So part of what attracts students is the reputation of faculty. They come because they want to work with this person or that person. But they won't come if we can't find support, because other places will. So that's the biggest challenge. And the bottom line is quality grad students are absolutely essential. I can't count the number of faculty we've recruited who come here specifically saying, I want to come to Madison because I know I'll get great grad students. And that's where they want to do research, where they get good students.
Regent Law.
Well, thank you. This was unlike other presentations we have, I must say. It's very, very good.
I wasn't quite sure exactly how to take that comment.
Looking at your budget, you're a state public university, but you're not state funded. And we're not going back to a time when you're going to be state funded. Here you have one of the world's greatest universities, and the boundaries of this university are not the boundaries of the state. They're the boundaries of the globe, and perhaps like one of those places that made the Renaissance the Renaissance. This is this center of knowledge. And would hope that the Regents would consider that we think of this university in this way, and that we need a new approach to this university. And I would hope that at some point, President Wolf, that we would consider devoting one whole meeting of the Regents to the meaning of the future of Madison because of this unique global asset that it is.
Any other questions for Provost Farrell? Ralph Fish.
I'll just ask because you're here. I wouldn't ordinarily call you with this question, but I had with a school counselor in the Valley mentioning to parents that because of the state cuts in Madison, that you have so many more TAs teaching than faculty now. Has there been any movement in TAs having to come in versus faculty, that anything significant?
No.
Well, that's a good answer.
No, I think the budget cuts we've had have been primarily taken up in a variety of administrative levels and support staff, and that does impact education. I don't want to make it doesn't. The joke we have is we save money by letting classified staff go, so we have faculty running the Xerox machine. It's not clear that's saving money, but that's where we're at. But no, the number of faculty has remained pretty much constant. We have not increased the number of TAs, so I don't know where people get that idea, but it's not good enough.
All right, yes, with respect.
Kevin, I just add one thing, which really isn't directed at Pat as a question. I thought your presentation was really terrific as well, and very interesting. But I would pick up on a point Tom made. I would suggest that while it certainly would be interesting to talk about UW-Madison in a separate session, that I don't think UW-Madison may need a separate session. I think you're doing a terrific job of accomplishing what you want to accomplish and self-generating the change elements you need to retain those faculty or attract those students or whatever. I'll come back to a point I've made once before, which is I think we need to do strategic planning, which is how does UW-Madison fit in with all of the schools? How do we build on what UW-Madison has to help everybody in the state without, in an efficient, cost-effective way? I think it's timely to do that, and I think your presentation just shows what an engine UW-Madison, along with many of our schools, can be, but we need to see how the pieces all fit together. So thank you.
If I could make just one more quick comment, I promised one of my colleagues I'd pass out a little note to you, which is an invitation. We host every year what we call an innovation conference, where the idea is it's internal innovation. So that the notion is that we encourage schools and colleges, departments, who have come up with an interesting and new idea, a way to make better use of the resources, to tell everybody else about it, and then have the rest of the campus come down and steal as many ideas as they can from each other. And so I have an invitation that if you're in town in the end of March, I hope you'll come. The entertaining thing for us, of course, is that last year University of Minnesota came to steal ideas. And this year they're hosting their own. One of the big ideas they stole was they should have an innovation day like this.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Alan, for that broad look at the status of Madison. I think we all appreciated the emphasis on teaching and learning and the emphasis on outcomes and what you had to say. Next this morning, we'd like to take time to offer our thanks to Provost Elizabeth Hitch, who has kept UW La Crosse on track for the last several months as its interim chancellor. Liz is over here with us this morning. Her term in this role was certainly eventful. I always like to tell interim chancellors that they will have an eventful time when they step into the role, and I haven't been proven wrong yet, I don't think. She and her colleagues spent many weeks making the rounds to explain her campus's growth and access plan to both supporters and to critics. As you know, their perseverance has paid off. The UW La Crosse plan was approved by this board, and Governor Doyle has indicated it will be in the budget he proposes next week. Provost Hitch was also at the helm as UW La Crosse coped with the tragic loss of one of its students. Students and community members continue to talk about the problems associated with excessive alcohol use, and Liz has been a leader in helping the community find solutions to promoting student safety on and off campus. These are just a few among Liz's many accomplishments since June of last year, and I know that Chancellor Joe Gao is very happy to have had her good advice and counsel in the last several days as he begins his chancellorship. The La Crosse Tribune, the hometown paper there, dedicated an editorial to offering Liz its thanks and praise for her outstanding service. And today, we'll add our gratitude as well. I'll turn now to Regent Smith to read a resolution of appreciation for Provost Hitch.
Thank you, President Riley, and I would just echo your comments and indicate to Liz that certainly I think the La Crosse community, UWL, and our system is better off with leadership you've provided over the past 8 months, with many challenges, some of which President Riley alluded to. And therefore, we'd like to offer a resolution and plaque here, which reads as follows. Whereas Dr. Elizabeth J. Hitch has provided steady leadership as interim chancellor at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse since June of 2006, and whereas Dr. Hitch provided forward-thinking direction and guidance during a time of transition, maintaining a sharp focus on the future of UW-La Crosse, and whereas Hitch has been a passionate and confident champion for UW-La Crosse's proposed growth and access agenda designed to serve more students from Wisconsin and elsewhere, to encourage students from low-income families, and to generate revenues to sustain campus growth. And whereas, with your peer leaders from Viterbo University and Western Technical College, Dr. Hitch led a community advocacy group to raise community awareness about the risks of excessive and dangerous alcohol consumption and to promote personal safety and responsibility. And whereas Liz's leadership earned her the respect of UW-La Crosse's shared governance groups, the Academic Staff Council, the Faculty Senate, and the Student Association. And whereas Hitch has been a responsive leader and a strong proponent of UW-La Crosse and the people in its campus community, be it therefore resolved that the Board of Regents of the University of Wisconsin System hereby offer thanks and commendation to Dr. Elizabeth J. Hitch for her service as interim chancellor at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, and thanks Hitch for her continued service as provost at UW-La Crosse.
Thank you. That is just so nice to be acknowledged in that way. When I addressed the campus at the beginning of spring semester, I said I never would have anticipated the ride that 216 days serving as interim chancellor would be, but who was counting? It was challenging, rewarding, frustrating, tiring, energizing, and more. I really did enjoy it. I've been astounded by the talent at UWL, energized by the hard work of others, and enlightened by listening to the thoughts of many, both our champions and our critics. One of the things I've learned during this interim period is that the chancellor is often the face of the university, but cannot be effective in the role without the support of a lot of people. One of the things that I've particularly appreciated is the support of Kevin and the system staff. They've provided good advice and counsel when I asked, certainly a lot of aid, and sometimes when I didn't ask, they knew to tell me how to keep me on the path, which was good. I must also thank Brent Smith, who's taught me that the political process can work, and I wasn't so sure that I thought that when I started this job. One of my favorite quotes is from Wayne Gretzky. Perhaps you've heard this. Wayne says, "You need to skate to where you think the puck is going to be." And I think Brent follows that advice from Wayne very carefully, and it certainly has helped us to move our proposals and ideas forward. So thanks to Brent for that. I've also appreciated the advice of the regents and the other chancellors. It was easier to be the interim chancellor because you all treated me like the real deal. And indeed, you have to be during the time that you serve. So I've appreciated that very much. My fellow provosts, too, were a great support. Nice little cheerleading team for me, and I'm very pleased to be back with those extraordinary academic professionals with whom I serve. One of the things that I found really surprising about being interim chancellor was that the Seven Rivers region community is just a huge support for UWL and for the chancellor. They're just a cheerleading team for us. And it was a legacy that I inherited from Doug Hosted and from Judith Kuipers, that building of that community support. I very much appreciated that, and I know Joe is already beginning to see that level of support from the Seven Rivers region. So, while I've learned a great deal serving as interim chancellor, I'm very pleased to return to my provost role and to assist our new chancellor in whatever ways I can. It was an honor to have been asked and a privilege to have served.
Well, some great news to emphasize this month for our growth agenda for Wisconsin. If you had a chance to listen to the Governor's State of the State address a couple weeks ago, you heard Governor Doyle outline his strong intent to reinvest in this university. We heard that he wants to invest in our proposals to produce more graduates, to expand our research capacity, and to help grow jobs across Wisconsin. Our students heard that they could look forward to more of the financial aid they need to pay for college, and that support for our students is certainly very, very welcome, and for their families. The governor's speech recognized that the University of Wisconsin gives this state a, quote, unique advantage, and it was encouraging to hear him credit this university's innovative energy as the key to the state's success. We're hearing from more and more supporters that they agree our growth agenda will indeed be a wise investment for the state of Wisconsin. And we've heard leaders from both parties and both houses express support for the UW's emphasis on affordability and access and economic development. In the last several months, at least 75 community leaders, business executives, and elected leaders have stepped up to publicly endorse the growth agenda for Wisconsin. I've mentioned many of these folks to you in previous months' meetings, but since we've last met in December, we've received additional support from, for example, the Academic Staff Senates at UW-Oshkosh and UW-Madison, the Classified Staff Advisory Committee at UW-Stevens Point, La Crosse County Board Chair Steve Doyle, the members of United St. Croix Valley Days, which helped to advocate for the growth agenda during a day of legislative visits here at the Capitol, and Senator Dave Hansen, who wrote in to lend his strong backing for the Northeastern Wisconsin growth agenda and the role it can play in that region's economic development. This kind of demonstrated statewide support will remain important as the budget moves through the legislature now, and I'll continue to update you as we hear more from our UW advocates. I have also continued to travel around the state to promote our growth agenda. In December, just after the board met, in that month, I joined Chancellor Bunnell in Stevens Point for a series of conversations in that community. Linda and I talked with business leaders on the Portage County Business Council, who were especially interested in how our growth agenda could add to that region's economic development work. We met with community members at a session of the Stevens Point Kiwanis Club and with faculty, staff, and students at Stevens Point during a campus-wide open forum. We also took our growth agenda message to the editorial boards of the Stevens Point Journal and the Wausau Daily Herald and got very good coverage from both. I'll be hitting the road again at the end of this month for a visit to the Fox Valley. I plan to meet with business and community leaders affiliated with the Fox City Chamber of Commerce and with more than 200 members of the downtown Appleton Rotary. So I hope we'll have time to talk with editorial boards there as well. UW Fox Valley Dean Jim Perry arranged for Chancellor Wiley and me to speak with these groups in the Fox Valley about the growth agenda and whatever else is on their minds regarding the university. And in March, I'll take the Growth Agenda Roadshow to Superior, where Chancellor Erlenbach will be wearing his Bermuda shorts by then, he assures me, and we'll make similar rounds in that part of the state. A word about the Kaufman Award that was recently awarded to the University of Wisconsin-Madison. As the governor mentioned in his State of the State address, Wisconsin has thousands of researchers and entrepreneurs, he said, with good ideas for new businesses. And by unleashing a new generation of entrepreneurs, we can win the global competition and put Wisconsin to work. Entrepreneurship is a key to building a dynamic Wisconsin, and I'm pleased that the UW will be instrumental in helping to foster further the entrepreneurial climate in Wisconsin. This past December, UW-Madison Chancellor John Wiley and Governor Doyle announced that the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation of Kansas City had designated UW-Madison as one of its 8 new Kauffman campuses. This designation comes with $5 million to help train students in the principles and practices of entrepreneurship and to spur greater research and commercialization statewide. In the true spirit of the Wisconsin idea, we'll work with UW-Madison and eventually all the campuses of the UW system on this vital initiative. Together, we can broaden the UW's great legacy of teaching, research, and outreach, grow the next generation of young entrepreneurs, provide them with access to capital, and make Wisconsin the envy of the knowledge economy. So congratulations to John and his colleagues on this noteworthy award. Also related to our growth agenda, WISIS and the UW System Office of Federal Relations are continuing to foster inter-campus and industry research collaborations. At the end of last month, about 40 faculty, staff, and industry reps met at the UW Eau Claire campus to learn more about the tools and talents researchers are using to develop cutting-edge nanoscience. The group heard how nanoscience could mean more advances for Northwest Wisconsin industries like forest products and plastics. UW Eau Claire is, of course, home to the state-of-the-art Materials Science Center, the cornerstone of the NanoSTEM initiative in the growth agenda. There's also some good news on the federal budget front. The House has now approved a fiscal year 2007 funding bill that would invest in key research agencies and has forwarded the bill to the Senate. The bill would mean more funding for the National Institutes of Health, National Science Foundation, and the Department of Energy's Office of Science, all of which make federal funds available for university research. The bill would also raise the maximum Pell Grant for low-income students by $260, the first Pell Grant increase since 2002. For 2008, President Bush proposed a similar, even larger Pell Grant increase in his budget this past Monday. The President is proposing to raise the Pell next year by 14%, or an additional $550, and by 33% over the next 5 years. The federal process isn't over yet, but these are good indications that the federal government will be stepping up in some way to help more Wisconsin students pay for college. It's always gratifying to hear and see so much good that's taking place across the UW system, but sometimes there's sad news that nonetheless reminds us of what we're about. In that regard, I want to acknowledge the death this week of a longtime member of this board. Regent Emeritus Odie Fish was a key player in the formation of the UW system as we know it today. He served 2 terms on this board, first from 1970 to 1978, and then again from 1982 to 1989. In his first term, Odie helped write the legislation that established this university system and its governing principles under Chapter 36 of Wisconsin statutes. In his second term, Regent Fish chaired the study group that created one of the university's comprehensive strategic plans called Planning the Future, adopted in 1986. And he also served a term as the vice president of the Board of Regents. Even after more than 16 years of service, when he retired from the board in 1989, Odie told his fellow regents that he gained more from his time as a regent than he felt he gave back. Nevertheless, we'll remember Regent Fish as an engaging leader who devoted his time, his energy, his extensive knowledge about the UW's history to making this university the best it could be, with students always first in mind. Regent Fish was one of those university trustees, a member of this Board of Regents, who did not have a college degree himself, and perhaps because of that appreciated the value of higher education more profoundly. I know that Regent Bradley has a remembrance of Regent Fish, so I'll turn to him for a word.
Well, some of you, excuse me, knew Odie Fish as a personal friend. I knew him as Regent Fish. It was 35 years ago. He started his term on this board, and I was a budget analyst working downstairs on the 15th floor. In fact, I think he usually sat where Regent Keene is sitting. And 35 years ago, on a Friday, just like today, he was sitting in this room, and I was sitting down in my office, and somebody made a motion to pass a resolution. And it was a resolution on a freshman admissions policy. And that resolution said we're going to have criteria. It said, in recognizing the necessity of making educational opportunity equally accessible to all its citizens through the University of Wisconsin system, it is important that the diverse needs of the state's population be accommodated through a flexible admissions policy. So it said that the campuses could look at a student's rank in class. It said that a campus may require test scores of applicants. And it said that students also may be considered if on the basis of other factors they appear to have a reasonable probability of success. Particular consideration and admission will be given to applicants who have been out of school for 2 or more years, had service in the military, and to students who have been disadvantaged as a result of substandard education, family income level, or ethnic background. Well, Odie Fish believed in those principles, and he joined his Regent colleagues and passed that resolution unanimously 35 years ago.
Thank you. Well said. Thank you. Thank you, Regent Bradley. We've been trying to convince a lot of people that the admissions policy that's before you today is not a new thing. Well, 35 years ago, we were doing it. Yes, Regent Loftus.
One additional comment. Odie Fish was on the Board of Regents the whole time I was in the legislature. We became friends. He was the first person that called me when I was appointed by the governor to this. He was not only well known in the legislature, but well loved. He was there all the time. We all liked him. He made a great difference for the university just by simply coming to the legislature. So he'll be sorely missed, but what a great man.
Thank you, Regent Loftus. Late last year, we also learned of the passing of E. David Cronin, an influential and revered former dean in the College of Letters and Science at UW-Madison and a professor of history there for more than 4 decades. We could spend the rest of today recounting Dean Cronin's contributions and achievements, but many of these extraordinary deeds I think we've read about elsewhere. They've been eloquently articulated already. But I did want to invoke Dave Cronin's legacy here today because I believe it speaks volumes about the caliber of faculty and administrative leadership that has blessed this system for decades. Dave Cronin was a scholar, an innovator, and a diversifier. During his tenure as dean, he introduced many new LNS programs, including Afro-American Studies, Women's Studies, Anthropology, and Computer Sciences. He also led the adoption of computer technology for research and teaching, a first in that era. He was a strong advocate for focusing greater resources and energy on undergraduate education, and he actively recruited minority faculty and students to the UW-Madison campus. In his last lecture before retiring as LNS Dean in 1988, he spoke powerfully about the importance of liberal education. He said this, "In short, we are content if our letters and science graduates leave the college with the humility that comes from knowing how little rather than how much one knows. During their brief time with us, we want them to learn how to make the most of their talents so that they will spend the rest of their lives being unwilling to settle for anything less." It was Socrates, I think, who defined wisdom as knowing what you don't know. Dave Cronin was a wise man. Finally today, following yes, Regents.
I had the good fortune of being a part of the history department alumni and working on a program called Pathways to Excellence at the Madison campus. And I got to know Dean Cronin, and he was not only a wonderful man and a true representative of the best of the university, but he wrote a wonderful history of the university, which I think we all started to read. And it's showing the ups and downs of it over the years. And he had the good sense to bring forth his son, William Cronin, who's the Philip Jackson Turner Professor of American History at Madison, and a great national scholar. He and his family are just representative of the best of the university. And I think your words are well stated, and he will be remembered very deeply by this faculty and campus.
Very nice. Thank you, Mike. Finally today, following this meeting, we'll adjourn to a ceremony where we will honor 4 outstanding UW students with Academic Achievement Awards. As I mentioned last month, the awards are in partnership with Alliant Energy here in Madison. Alliant has generously created a $400,000 endowment to fund the Alliant Energy Errol B. Davis Jr. Achievement Awards, which honor outstanding scholarship and community service of students from traditionally underrepresented minority groups. The awards are named to honor former Alliant Energy and Regent Errol B. Davis, former Alliant Energy CEO and Regent Errol B. Davis, who's now the Chancellor of the University System of Georgia. So Errol moved from the corporate frying pan into the public university fire, and there he is. These awards are a fitting tribute to Mr. Davis's commitment to advancing opportunities for academic excellence, community service, and leadership for students of color in Wisconsin. 4 students from UW-Platteville and UW-Madison have been selected as the first recipients of $4,000 awards upon graduation. Ninrat Tiri is a senior at UW-Madison majoring in electrical engineering. During his time at UW-Madison, Ninrat has worked for IBM and Hewlett-Packard and has contributed to a number of research projects. He's also the president of the National Society of Black Engineers, Wisconsin Black Engineering Student Society, and is a resident advisor and multicultural residential consultant in UW-Madison's residence halls. Ty Khan is a UW-Platteville senior majoring in business administration. Ty is on the dean's list, and he's held business internships. He's an active member of the Student Asia Club and is secretary of the Hmong Club at UW-Platteville. Ty is one of 10 children, and he hopes to become a manager or executive for a large corporation. Because I guess after being one of 10 children, why would you want to go to a small corporation? Nathaniel Jose Martinez graduated from UW-Madison last semester with degrees in management and human resources and marketing and a certificate in Chicano studies. While at UW-Madison, he worked with middle school students in English as a second language programs and with the People program, Madison's pre-college program that helps high school students bridge the gap between secondary education and higher education. Nathaniel also formed the Latino Men's Group, a support group for Latino students and for those who want to learn about the Latino culture. Dur Vang graduated from UW-Platteville last semester with a degree in electrical engineering, making him the first in his family to receive a college degree. He was president of UW-Platteville's Hmong Club for 2 years and earned Multicultural Student of the Year and Multicultural Leadership Awards. Dur plans to attend graduate school and will pursue a career in electrical engineering. So we'll learn more about these students at the awards ceremony this afternoon, but their accomplishments certainly qualify in this good news report as very good news. Mr. President, that concludes my good news report, except for one postscript, and this has to do with Regent McPike. I think a number of you know that Milt won the Martin Luther King Award at this year's city-county presentation this past Martin Luther King Day, and we're all very proud of him for that, but he's got a new honor that maybe everybody hasn't seen yet. If you look at the cover of 50-plus Lifestyles. This is the... What's that? Oh, yeah. Oh, we're going to get there. This is the magazine for Dane County's active 50-plus population, and the article on Milt, which is wonderful, says, "He loves education. Milt McPike continues to care." Now, if you look up top, you'll see that Milt's kind of leaning, and there's a little caption that kind of looks like it leaked out of his right ear that says, "Let's talk about sex." S-E-X in big, bold letters. So I think this means he loves education, he continues to care about education, but he doesn't want to talk about education. He wants to talk about sex. So I thought in the lead up to Valentine's Day, for any of you who might need a consultation, you'll know who the sex doctor is on the board. Mr. President, that concludes my report.
At this time, I'd like to request Regent Danae Davis to give the report of the Education Committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm pleased to report the summary from yesterday's lengthy but hugely productive meeting of the Education Committee. Our first item was the UW Systems Freshman Admissions Policy. Following what I hope you all agreed was an excellent and very informative discussion of the UW Systems criteria for approval of Wisconsin Technical College Systems collegiate transfer programs and the UW Systems Freshman Admissions Policy in the morning meeting of the Education Committee, at which all Regents were invited. Our committee, in its afternoon session, again took up the UW Systems Freshman Admissions Policy. Regents Spector and Regent President Walsh raised concerns that while socioeconomic factors are considered in the admissions process, information on socioeconomic status is not explicitly included in the application process. The Education Committee was informed of the complexity of this issue and that the UW Systems Application Review Committee is reviewing this matter and will offer recommendations addressing this issue in the near future. In addition, the committee was told that as students and parents become aware of the criteria used by UW Systems institutions, they will provide more information on socioeconomic status, or the availability of that being one of the criteria. Regent President Walsh offered an amendment to the policy in Section 1E, adding language to clarify that when institutions waive one or more requirements for particular applicants, that it is based on sound educational judgment. And the language that you will find the amended resolution to include is as quotes, that the student will succeed at the institution, benefit from the educational experience, and contribute to the educational environment. Both this policy, the UW Systems Freshman Admissions Policy as revised, and the Wisconsin Technical College System Collegiate Transfer Programs resolution are in your red folder. And what I'm going to do is just tell you the discussion on each of the items on the agenda, and then at the end I'll offer resolutions both for consent agenda items as well as individual resolutions at the end of the day. Item number 2, program authorizations, PhD in educational psychology at UW Milwaukee and Chippewa Valley Technical College Associate of Science and Liberal Arts Transfer Programs. Those were the 2 program authorization items. With respect to the first, the committee took the UW Milwaukee PhD in educational psychology item first. Provost Rita Chang introduced Professor Nadia Fuad, Chair of the Department of Educational Psychology. Professor Fuad described what is a realignment of our 4 programs, that is, counseling psychology, school psychology, research methods, and learning and development, that are currently offered under the UW Milwaukee's Urban Education PhD. This new PhD in educational psychology will better reflect the nature of the programs, better serve students as they seek employment, and provide visibility that will aid in attracting and retaining the highest quality faculty. Professor Fuad stressed the quality and diversity of the current faculty, as well as the focus on diversity in the curriculum. She noted the very diverse student body currently pursuing these programs under the urban education degree. The second program before us for discussion, and we only had discussion because this matter will come back to us in March, was the Associate of Science degree proposed by the Chippewa Valley Technical College. This college transfer program will need to be evaluated by the committee pursuant to the principles, guidelines, and criteria approved by the board, that will be approved by the board this morning. I do want to note that President Riley will need and take the opportunity to actually review the proposal for Chippewa Valley Technical College's associate degree program in light of those criteria. I introduced a number of WTCS staff and leaders who were present for the discussion, including WTCS President Dan Clancy, Chippewa Valley Technical College President Bill Eilenfeld, Vice President Kathy Cullen, and Associate Vice President Annette Severson. Interim Senior Vice President Rebecca Martin introduced the topic by noting that the purpose of the discussion was to frame a set of questions relating to the key criteria against which this program will need to be reviewed. She then introduced Associate Vice President Ron Singer. Everybody's got great titles, huh? Associate Vice President, Vice President, Senior Vice President, who outlined a set of questions relating to the three criteria essential to our review, that is, need, collaboration, and resources. In addition, Ron summarized some of the basic information regarding the proposal relating to these criteria. We then heard from Keith Summers, a member of the UW College's Board of Visitors, who spoke in support of the central role that the UW Colleges play in providing associate degree education to citizens of Wisconsin and the role they can play in offering this degree program particularly. He urged the committee to carefully consider collaboration to avoid duplication. Regent Keene expressed her strong support for the work of CDTC and its president, indicating that her visits to the district demonstrate to her the quality of programs of the district, that is CDTC, and the leadership provided by its president in meeting area needs. Chancellor Sorensen indicated the support he had provided for the CDTC program before its board, and he also indicated numerous examples of collaboration over the years. Questions and points were raised about the capacity of the three-area UW comprehensive institutions to accommodate students in their freshman classes, the need to maintain the strength of the UW colleges, and the focus on students in considering this proposal, and the need to market programs to working adults. We were also advised that UW colleges has a proposal to address the academic needs in this area. President Riley noted that he had not yet made a decision on this program, as I previously mentioned. His recommendation will be presented to the board at our March meeting, accompanied by an analysis of the proposal, similar to that provided for UW academic programs considered by the board. We anticipate a robust discussion by this board at our meeting in March. So then we moved on to charter schools authorization by UW Milwaukee. I want to, before I get into the details of my report, I want to recognize that both the Milwaukee Renaissance Academy High School leader, as well as the Seeds of Health elementary school leaders are present, and I'd like them to stand, Deanna Singh and Marcia Spector. Since they've come so far, I just wanted everybody to know that they're here. I should also acknowledge that both brought their very able and hugely qualified talented teams with them, so they didn't come by themselves from Milwaukee. So we next consider proposals for authorization of two new charter schools at UW1. The first is the Milwaukee Renaissance Academy and High School. Provost Rita Chang and Dr. Bob Catman, who is also present, by the way. Did you hear Bob? Here he is. Okay. Presented the proposal. Also in attendance, as I mentioned, were Deanna Singh, leader, founder of the Milwaukee Renaissance Academy, as well as other members of her team. The Milwaukee Renaissance Academy would be UW Milwaukee's 10th charter school. It would build on concepts pioneered by the Building Excellence Schools of Boston, Massachusetts, and KIPP, which are acknowledged leaders in developing high-achieving schools that address the needs of low-income urban students. This foundation is of particular interest to UW because of the documented success in academic achievement of children represented by these two programs, particularly KIPP. And the fact that, if approved, this school will provide an opportunity to research what makes those successful, especially in the, with a new school. We had a lengthy discussion We had a lengthy discussion in which Regent Loftus queried Chancellor Santiago about the relation of charter schools to UWM's mission and his priorities. Chancellor Santiago eloquently indicated that his predecessor, Nancy Dimper, had made education the cornerstone of UWM's highly regarded community engagement activities, and he feels committed to continuing those efforts as part of UWM's leadership role in the Milwaukee community. Other questions were raised by Regents Loftus, Crane, Seminis, about such things as budget requirements, public and private funding sources, impact of these charter schools on MPS's system, and the research role of UWM with respect to its charter schools, and the responsibility to cross-fertilize best practices developed in charter schools to benefit all of Milwaukee school children. In addition, questions were raised by Regents, including UWM's responsibility in conducting background checks of charter school personnel, efforts to achieve race and ethnic balance, and the legal counsel and Office of Academic Affairs review processes. Regent Spector, I want to say eloquently and passionately, indicated his strong conviction that charter schools have a role to play in helping to raise the level of success of school children in Milwaukee. Regent King questioned the consideration of merit pay indicated in the proposal, and a motion to restrict the use of merit pay by the school failed. I might add that was an item that is under discussion and deliberation and research by the school. That have not made a determination to do merit pay, but it was indicated as an item that their board is currently reviewing. The second charter school discussed by the committee was the Seeds of Health, Inc. charter school. Seeds of Health currently operates other charter schools in the Milwaukee area with great success, as well as the school that is the subject of this action, for which they seek conversion to a UWM charter school. In other words, Seeds of Health already operates this school as a private school, and what they want to do is to convert it to a public charter school under the authority of UWM and this board. This would enable it to expand through grade 8. Students would then have the option of attending would have the opportunity, let me clear that up, to attend one of the Seeds of Health high schools that they also operate. The focus of Seeds of Health is strong family involvement. In fact, we were told that the current school for which they seek conversion has 100% participation by parents. I don't know any school that has 100% parental participation, but this one does. Marcia Spector, Executive Director of Seeds of Health, and sister of Regent Mike Spector, and other Seeds of Health staff were present and answered questions. Regent Spector recused himself from discussion or vote on this agenda item and asked that we note that he sat next to General Counsel Pat Brady during his of the proposal to ensure ethical behavior. So then we moved on to the UW System's appointments to the Natural Areas Preservation Council. This item consisted of the reappointment of 2 UW Systems representatives to the Natural Areas Preservation Council. The last time we did this was in 2004, and this is a legislatively mandated council. So the resolution that we are asked to approve is the reappointments of Dr. Dennis Yokers and Dr. Joy Zedler for terms beginning January 1, 2007 and ending June 30, 2009. We'll be asked later to approve 2 additional appointments. We then moved on to UW La Crosse's summary report of accreditation reviewed by the North Central Association, Higher Learning Commission, and institutional report on general education. This turned out to be an invigorating conversation, much to our surprise, and I'll tell you why in a minute. The committee heard a report from UW La Crosse on the accreditation review by the North Central Association of Higher Learning Commission and their institutional report on general education. Provost Liz Hitch introduced Dr. Carmen Wilson, Professor of Psychology, Accreditation Study Coordinator, and Chair of the Accreditation Steering Committee at UW La Crosse, who reported that the Higher Learning Commission approved UW La Crosse's request to offer the doctorate of physical therapy with UW Milwaukee and commended them for the thoroughness and preparation of the self-study. The HLC also listed 3 areas requiring follow-up relative to diversity, assessment, and general education. Since these areas were also listed as concerns during the 1996 accreditation review, that is 10 years ago, the committee requested that the UW La Crosse Chancellor report in a year on progress in all three areas identified by the Higher Learning Commission. We learned that general education assessment and alignment is a huge issue on many of our campuses, and it requires board attention. And we heard this from numerous people, including Chancellor Brunel of UW Stevens Point and Provost Hammersmith of UW Green Bay. But there was a lot of passion around this being a significant issue, that is assessment of our general education curriculum and programs. And so we do expect that Interim Senior Vice President Rebecca Martin will report back to our committee on this issue. So I wanted to make you aware of that. Close to last, was the UW Stevens Point authorization to recruit for provost. As we know, Virginia Helm, Provost and Vice Chancellor at UW Stevens Point, has announced her retirement. She has been a great academic leader, and I know we'll all miss her, as will her colleagues throughout the state and at her institution. Given the lateness of the day, we did not have a report from our esteemed Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs, Rebecca Martin, but she did let us know that we can look forward to a conversation wherein we revisit our objectives that we set back in October for accomplishments and goals for the committee for the year at our next meeting, hopefully. So, I have 3 resolutions offered to you as consent agenda items for your action, and they are in your folder. The first is Resolution 11B2, authorizing the PhD in Educational Psychology at UW Milwaukee. I should say binder. The second is Resolution 11D, approving the reappointments of the UW Systems representatives to the Natural Areas Preservation Council. And the third is Resolution 11F, authorizing the recruitment of a provost vice chancellor at UW Stevens Point.
Is there a second to the motion? Second. Is there a request to remove any item from the consent agenda? Seeing none. Any discussion on the items? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Consent agenda passes.
Mr. President, I have 4 additional resolutions approved yesterday by the Education Committee that are not a part of the consent agenda, and I present them for your action. The first is Resolution A, criteria for approval of Wisconsin Technical College System's collegiate transfer programs, as amended by Regent Keene, and which is also in our packet.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? No discussion? Ready for the vote on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes.
The second is Resolution 11A, adopting the UW Systems freshman admissions policy as amended.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion. Regent Bradley.
I just wanted to review a couple of things to make sure that, in interest of accuracy, it was reported in the Journal Sentinel that this policy would require every campus to change the way it reviews applicants. And I got the impression from listening to the discussion yesterday that the campuses were saying that this was not going to require them to make changes in how they review applicants. Also, this article reported that made a conclusion that if we pass this policy, we will be having a policy that violates Wisconsin law. And it was my understanding that, based on the advice of our council, that we don't believe that passing this policy violates Wisconsin law. Is that correct? And finally, the article pointed out that UW-Madison and other selective universities have used this admissions policy for years, suggesting that the other campuses have not used this admissions policy for years. But isn't it true that the campuses have used this admission policy for years, which is why you're not going to be doing anything different? Good. Thanks. I just wanted to clarify that.
Any further discussion? I have one comment. I guess we should understand that this is complicated and we can't expect complete accuracy on the reporting, and obviously that one wasn't very accurate. But what's really troubling to me is that and we repeat this over and over, and I've had private meetings, not private, I've had meetings with reporters, that no one wants to talk about the importance of having a diverse campus. And the threshold issue is that good? Do educational benefits flow from it? And we really need to direct the conversation to the importance of a diverse campus. And the diversity isn't just race, it's geography, it's handicapped, it's the veteran, it's the football player. They all bring something else to the campus. And where we get lost in this discussion, and where unfortunately the top of the fold headlines are, they want to focus it in on race, and that's not what this is about. It's truly about having a better educational experience for our students. And when I read the letters from the business people, they're not saying, please give me an Hispanic or an African American to interview. They're saying, please give me a student, any one of your students, that has experienced diversity so that they're prepared for the global workplace. And that's what we're doing for the people of Wisconsin. We treasure the values of being a veteran and having a second experience in the workforce, and being a non-traditional student and succeeding at being when they're handicapped. And we treasure the fact that they can come from low economic status. And we're going to give them that help, but it's not about helping them, it's about helping all the students. And so I just wish that those that want to report on this and those that want to talk about it would ask themselves the question, is that something we should do? And if we should do it, then we have to consider as one of the many factors race. Any other comments? Ready for the vote? Can I
make a comment? I just wanted the board to hear a very little bit from an op-ed article that was published in the New York Times on Sunday, August 8th, 1999. The author then was President Gerald R. Ford, former President Ford, who we just lost recently, as you know. He wrote at the time that the University of Michigan cases were under consideration at his alma mater. And he said this: for the class of 35, which was his graduating class at the University of Michigan, educational opportunities were diminished by the relative scarcity of African Americans, women, and various ethnic groups on campus. I've often wondered how different the world might have been in the late 1940s, 50s, and 60s. How much more humane and just if my generation had experienced a more representative sampling of the American family. He went on to say, did President Ford, times of change are times of challenge. It is estimated that by 2030, 40% of all Americans will belong to various racial minorities. Already, the global economy requires unprecedented grasp of diverse viewpoints and cultural traditions. I don't want future college students to suffer the cultural and social impoverishment that afflicted my generation. If history has taught us anything in this remarkable century, he's writing at the end of the 20th century, it is the notion of America as a work in progress. Now, I think America is a work in progress. It was when my 4 Irish grandparents came here at the beginning of the 20th century. I think the great genius of America is that it is always a work in progress. Wisconsin is a work in progress. The balanced and reasonable, and we have every reason to believe legal, admissions policy that you have before you today allows us to continue to make progress toward that just and humane society that President Ford envisioned. And that's why I recommend it to you for your approval.
Thank you. Any other discussion? We have a motion on the question. Yes.
I just want to say in anticipation of our vote, and as an African-American woman, and particularly a graduate of our fine institutions, both Oshkosh and Madison, that I couldn't be prouder of this board. And that is because in our quest to make clear about what we are for, we resisted the temptation to make it easier for ourselves by taking the word race out of the policy. We resisted that. I think that is commendable. I really think it is the right decision. I very much appreciate being a member of this body for having the courage to do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Can I have a motion on the question so we can do it thoroughly? It's got a motion and a second. That's non-debatable. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Roll call.
On the question. On the question.
We're just moving the question.
Moving the question.
Yeah, I understand. Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Now on the motion for approval. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Roll call.
Okay.
Regent Walsh.
Aye.
Regent Spector.
Yes.
Regent Smith.
Yes.
Regent Shields.
Yes.
Regent Summons.
Yes.
Regent Rosensweig. Yes. Regent Randall.
Yes.
Regent Pruitt.
Yes.
Regent McPike.
Yes.
Regent Loftus.
Yes.
Regent Davis.
Yes.
Regent King. Yes. Regent Crane.
Yes.
Regent Conley Kiesler.
Yes.
Regent Bradley.
Yes.
Regent Barheck.
Yes.
There are 16 ayes and no noes.
Regent Davis.
Yes, I have two more resolutions. One is Resolution 116.1, approving the charter school contract with the Milwaukee Renaissance Academy.
Second.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Discussion. Regent Loftus.
Well, we had a very vigorous discussion of this and questioning in our education committee. We were hoping that we could have a chance to talk about the general subject absent prior to the two particulars here, but I guess we'll have to take this opportunity here. The general concern, and I think the committee wants President Riley and President Walsh really to hear the general concern. And first is the time of the chancellor that needs to be devoted to this, especially when something goes wrong. And second, it's not a priority that this chancellor has articulated before this board in the past. Doesn't mean it's a priority, not a priority, but there are priorities and everything cannot be a priority. Also, the question of the ability to monitor this with 2.5 people, I think it ends up with. But the overriding question is that UWM and the Chancellor are entering into this on behalf of the Board of Regents. In other words, we are doing this. We are the school board under the statutes for these purposes. The statutes allow the Chancellor to operate a school. That's not what he's doing. He is entering into a contract with 2 private entities on our behalf. And I think President Riley and President Walsh, either we embrace this as a new mission of UWM and clearly articulate that this is part of their mission, or we get out of this business. If we're going to stay in it, then we have to act like a school board, and that's what we did yesterday. We went through the two contracts line by line and had our questions, and I think that's what the future is going to look like. These are two new charters, not renewals. So, and we have specific questions about the two schools, but at least for me, those are the general concerns that I had.
Can you hear from the chancellor on that? Because, I mean, I really intended to vote yes on these, and I want to hear from you if there's major issues with time and maybe your staff about what you can and cannot do, and if you have concerns.
First off, I appreciate Regent Loftus's issues you raised. I disagree vehemently with his portrayal as the priorities of UWM. Just because we have multiple priorities does not mean that K-12 education takes a secondary role to our institution. We serve a wide variety of institutions, charter schools, choice schools, parochial schools, and MPS schools, and we will continue to do that. My role is not to convince you to lobby for these schools. My role is to give you the information and the facts. His portrayal of my time and the institution's goals and objectives are incorrect. The time that I personally spent on the charters is twofold. On the one hand, when I visit the charters, and secondly, the time I put in when I have the Board of Regents meetings. We have a very good oversight committee. The Board of Regents yesterday asked many, many questions, detailed questions. I feel that those questions were answered completely, fully, and they certainly were to my satisfaction. My role is to ensure that these schools are good schools, that they have accountability. Yes, we have a staff of 1.5 people. But rather than looking at that at the input, look at the output. 1.5 people do a wonderful job of overseeing these particular organizations. We do it on a shoestring budget, but that does not mean that the quality of the oversight is any less than you would have at any other schools in Milwaukee. It is my belief that Milwaukee has a K-12 crisis, and our institution is not going to let that simply go by the wayside. I'm personally committed to this, even though publicly I'm moving other agenda items forward. This does not mean that this has a secondary role in my administration. So I wanted to make that very clear. We will answer any facts that you have, but I do go back to Regent Loftus's main point. Should UWM be in the chartering business? And that is an issue that this board needs to take up. And I believe it would certainly clarify our role in this process, which I think that question is a very valid one. And we will continue to provide the educational facts and background that you need to make your decision. But I concur with Regent Loftus. I think that's a question that this board needs to take up. Irrespective of the outcome of that discussion, we will continue to support a wide variety of schools in Milwaukee because we are the recipients of the products of those schools, and we must ensure a vigorous and strong pipeline, and we'll do everything we can to maintain it. Thank you.
Regent Crane.
I want to say that there was extensive conversation yesterday afternoon and questions from a number of us, but they weren't all the same questions. That's one of the things I want to make clear. And I have a deep interest in this topic, and my bottom line interest is how does the university sponsoring and operating the charter schools affect education more generally in Milwaukee, and how does that strengthen public education, including that of the Milwaukee Public Schools? I've learned a lot in the discussions that I've been in now running a couple of months. I want to continue that, and I want to continue to learn. So I think that the discussion that took place was justified. I think we do need to understand about where we think we're going with this, what our responsibility is, and what and maybe wanting to know more about the Milwaukee situation in general. I appreciated the conversation, and I expect it to continue. But at this point, I am supporting the addition of these two schools.
Regent Davis.
And in informal conversations with several regents, and I just want to make this public, we will continue, as Regent Crane calls it, learn about charters, our authorities, the impact, and what have you in the future. So I want to, let you know that we understand that this is, there's several aspects of issues that we need to discuss, and we'll have staff to prepare us, both the staff at UWM as well as systems administration, so that we can continue to have vigorous conversations in the quest of learning what it is that our authority is, particularly from the future standpoint. So I don't want anyone to believe that we're stifling conversation around this issue.
Further discussion? On the motion, 1.1 C.
I wanted to just add one thing. In addition to in our discussion yesterday, I had voted no, and that was because of some additional information that was provided on the committee about the working conditions of faculty, and that the workday would be 7:30 to 5 p.m., and also that it was being considered, merit pay for the teachers was being considered based upon the achievement scores of the students. And I have concerns with that particular piece, realizing, of course, the faculty have not been hired and the contract has not been written. I do have concerns about merit pay based on achievement tests.
Any further discussion? Regent Loftus.
Well, based on Mary's remarks and based on the fact that under the statutes here, we are the school board. In the contract, there is no mention of merit pay. In supporting documents or ancillary documents, there is a discussion that the consideration would be based teacher pay on the test scores of this particular group of students in this school. And I offered an amendment which had either failed on a tie vote or whatever happened to it.
Failed by majority.
Majority.
Yes, it did. 4-3.
Am I allowed to offer that amendment in the full board?
You can offer any amendment you want.
All right. I've granted that it's not in the contract, but I would move that we amend this resolution to indicate that we would not allow this type of merit pay being considered for this institution. Mary, help me.
And I would second that.
Can I ask a clarification? What is this type of
merit pay? Just a merit pay based on score.
On achievement tests.
Based on achievement tests.
Student achievement.
Well,
we have a motion. We have a motion and a second to amend the charter to add the condition that the board will not allow merit pay based on achievement scores.
Would it be helpful to the board to hear from Dr. Kaplan, because he did have a position?
Well, I want to let the board discuss it first, and then if anyone needs that.
Well, that's why I asked. I asked the question. I didn't suggest.
And I'm saying not yet.
Okay.
I just want the discussion to go through first.
Is this unique, or how do the other charter schools do it? Is this something new, this merit issue, or?
And see, Dr. Kaplan is the one who can tell you how unique it is or not, but that's not timing right now.
In public schools,
it's hold my question then.
I would just say in public K-12 schools, I believe it's not used. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's not used. And this would be a public school.
We'll get to him. Any other further discussion? Michael?
I would oppose, as I did yesterday, Tom's motion, not because it's not necessarily correct if we study it, but I don't think to make a decision on it like this is the way to do it. I would extend that actually to everything he said this morning. I think we should look at this issue, but in a much more fuller, developed, staff-provided, among other things, way. With respect to merit pay, there are numerous definitions of it. It's hard to define it exactly. It's evolving, including in accordance with PI 34. I'm sorry that Libby's not here to talk about that. To have a blanket no without more extensive analysis of it and how it might fit into this school or not fit into this school or what it represents or what history they have, I just think would be premature.
Any further discussion? I have a comment. I'm going to vote no against this because this is an issue in the public today, and to just kind of scratch the surface with a shotgun approach on not only a fact not in evidence or a dispute not before us is to make a statement that I think we would look very clumsy doing. Now, do you want to ask for outside resources?
This fact, which is not before us under this system, is not ever going to be before us. This contract doesn't. When they do a teacher's contract, it's not going to come back before the board.
Well, the issue of merit pay based on achievement scores is not before us. Okay, if you'd like to call on somebody, you may.
Would like to hear.
I would like to hear that answer.
Generally, I can say this, that there are a variety of merit pay schema out there.
There are a variety of methodologies for looking at merit pay. They are in use in some charter schools. They are in use in some of the charter schools that we authorize. There are a variety of such programs in public schools throughout the country and throughout the state of Wisconsin in regular district schools. This is not an issue that I think is unique to the charter schools, nor is it unique to the state of Wisconsin. One other just correction on something that was said. You are not the school board. You are the authorizer, meaning you have the legal authority to grant another board to operate a school. And each school essentially operates as its own educational agency and has its own school board. We provide oversight and we provide a great deal of statistical collection to make certain that they are achieving, and then make determinations on whether or not we should allow them to continue to operate as a charter school.
Thank you.
Any further questions, comments? Seeing none, we'll vote on the proposed amendment to amend 1.1c and parent and one and a parent to read that there will be a condition that they will not allow merit pay based on achievement scores. On the proposed amendment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
The motion fails. On the motion, the main motion, is there any further discussion on it? Yes.
I wanted to make a point in general about the question that was posed, the bottom line question. Do these schools, or does this school, the charter schools, add or detract from the education of our children in Milwaukee? And I guess I wanted just to put a context to it. The legislature for a long time debated this, and they decided, in their wisdom, that in fact it would strengthen our schools. It would strengthen our schools, particularly when an academic institution was involved in such a process. And they did so with the thought that different models of education would help enhance the kinds of teaching that were going on in our urban schools, particularly in Milwaukee. And Milwaukee's not unique. The country is filled with urban schools that aren't performing the way in which we wish that they would. And it's terrible for all of us that happens. And anything that we can do that's reasonable to provide different options for parents in the public school system is just to strengthen it, not to weaken it. And I couldn't help but think, as we were talking about it, the wonderful schools that I visited throughout the district, and some of the successes that have spun off from some of these charter schools in other kinds of public schools. And to curtail it or cut it off at this time, I think, would be sad and almost criminal. So I just have to say that.
Thank you. Any other comments? On the main motion, this is to pass 1.1 C, parent 1 and parent, and not, it's to pass the main motion before you. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
The motion passes.
Okay, last one, Resolution 11632, approving the charter school contract with the Seeds of Health Elementary School.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second. Discussion. Regent Loftus.
The discussion here, the question here in general was that there didn't seem to be much to distinguish this particular elementary school as innovative or unique. The other thing, it was very hard to follow the series of events. And as Danae pointed out, this is a school already operated by the charter seeker as a private school, which I understood had both private tuition students and students who were there under voucher. The same operator of that school now wants to operate it and expand it as a charter school. And I have to admit, it took some time to kind of get out what was going on. So that's those were the items of discussion. I forget what's there now.
What is?
Regent.
Those were concerns raised by Regent Office, absolutely. The response to the question of what's so unique about the school was essentially the strength of the school, which is parental engagement. 100% parental engagement makes this a unique school, and that was the response. I think a lot of us were impressed by that. Secondly, yeah, it was kind of confusing what conversion means, because I don't recall us having a conversion option under discussion in the past. So it took us a minute to understand that she's operating the school, but the reason that she wants the charter is because it was eloquently stated by the Director of Education. Well, I can't think of your titles, but anyway, Educational Achievement. I'll make you up for the title. Is the fact that to be able to look in the face of these parents who have consistently asked, I wish you would go up to the 8th grade. I wish my student could stay, my child rather, could stay with your school. I wish I could be involved in this school through the 8th grade. And so that's the reason for the charter, is to provide the option of growing from what is K-5 right now to K-8 under the chartering authority of UW. Just for clarification, that's what I heard.
Regent Schutz.
All right. First of all, I'd like to thank Chancellor Santiago and Dr. Catman for their work on this. And of course, the people who have showed up. I got to see the Seeds of Hope, or the Seeds of Health elementary school presentation and stuff yesterday, and was really enjoyed that presentation. I guess the point that I want to make is that, I believe that this fits in with the pre-K through 16, deal that we want to do. I feel that, by having UWM take on some of these charters, especially in Milwaukee, obviously, is very important to our state. I mean, supporting the education system in our biggest city is very vital to the state in general. So for me to, like to hear, for instance, that Seeds of Health, has this 100% parental involvement, and that parents want this to continue on to the 8th grade level, which many of you know, 6 through 8 can be very, very volatile time for children. So I think it is vital for us to do this, especially this one. Fortunately, I couldn't speak to the other one because I wasn't there for that presentation, but I just wanted to make that point, that I believe that this fits in. Definitely.
Further discussion? Seeing none on the question, approval of Resolution 1.1.c.2, parent 2 and a parent. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion passes.
Could you refer me as that?
Yes, we would. And
May I make one more comment, David? I do want to say that I do think we have more work to do on this, because I do have some fundamental discussions that I want to take part in about where we're going with this and what the impact is, especially on the public school system that already exists and that is also part of our pre-K 12, pre-K 16 continuum. So I think it's important that we have that opportunity and that Milwaukee has the full opportunity also to participate and contribute to that.
thank you. Call on Regents.
President, let me conclude my report by noting that the Education Committee meeting adjourned at 4:45 p.m.
Thank you. Regent Smith.
Can I just ask for you to consider that at the next meeting where we're going to consider the Chippewa proposal, that be an entire board, especially the Education Committee, but the whole board be present? I think that's...
We'll consider that.
I know you'd consider it.
That's what you asked me to do, is consider it. If you want me to do it, ask me to do it.
I usually don't give you any orders.
Regent Rosenstein.
I just wanted to respond to Regent Crane's suggestion, and I would applaud that. I think that learning more about it is a really good thing, and I think there's nothing better to learn about something than to see it. And I don't know whether people want to do this, but I think maybe a road show to Milwaukee to see some of those schools
Maybe in July.
would be a really good idea.
June? Well, we'll do it in July, too.
Yeah, we don't like July.
But the issue...
All right, we've got to move on. Any other, you're done with your report, are you not, Regent Davis? You've announced your adjournment. I asked Regent Pruitt to report on the Business, Finance, and Audit Committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will share this report of the committee with my colleague, Regent Rosenzweig. The Business, Finance, and Audit Committee met at 1 p.m. We adjourned 2 hours and 15 minutes prior to the adjournment of the Education Committee. Minutes of the December 7th meeting were approved as presented. Our first item on the agenda was consideration of a salary adjustment for an academic leader to address recruitment and retention challenges for the chancellor at UW-Stevens Point. President Riley reminded us that last February, the board endorsed a new process whereby a periodic review of individual chancellor's salaries would be performed to determine whether there is a need for an adjustment to recognize competitive factors or to correct salary inequities. President Riley noted that he has received numerous letters from the Stevens Point community and regional business leaders, and he read portions from these 3 letters supporting Chancellor Bunnell. Regent Vice President Bradley briefly returned to his former stomping grounds at the Business and Finance Committee and commended Chancellor Bunnell and testified to how she has put regionalization into practice in north central Wisconsin and is a tremendous asset to that region and to this university system. As a result of all that and more, the committee unanimously supported a salary adjustment for the chancellor at UW-Stevens Point under this new process. The Business, Finance, and Audit Committee approved the following resolution, which I now present as a consent item. On behalf of the committee, I move adoption of Resolution 1.2.b, consideration of salary adjustment for a senior academic leader to address recruitment and retention challenges for a chancellor at UW-Stevens Point.
Second.
There's a motion and second. Any motion to remove this consent item? Hearing none. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. Regent Rosenzweig.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Annual financial report was taken up next, and Ginger Hens, Director of Financial Reporting, presented the UW System Annual Financial Report. She highlighted and gave a brief analysis of financial performance, the statement of net assets, revenues, expenses, and auditor communication. We noted the decline in expenditures for institutional support or pure administration from the previous year. The financial statement showed, however, that less than 5% of total operating expenditures spent on institutional support. We also discussed the internal control issues raised by the Legislative Audit Bureau, which included data access and business resumption planning. Both recommendations are going to be addressed by the staff, and the committee will receive a report periodically on the progress of that. We also looked at some revenue trend lines. Next, the trust funds and annual trust funds report. Assistant Trust Officer Doug Hare presented the annual trust funds report. He provided a brief summary of the report, including asset market values, annual returns, gifts, and disbursements made from the fund and the investment fees. Returns for the long-term, intermediate, and income funds all exceeded their benchmarks. Okay, good news. Recent diversification of investments is beginning to pay off. Next, we had a committee business with report on quarterly gifts, grants, and contracts. Vice President Debbie Durkin stated that total gifts, grants, and contracts for the 6-month period ending December 31st, 2006 were $625 million. Federal awards increased by $3.3 million, while non-federal awards increased by $24.6 million. Next came the review of committee actions and follow-up items. Vice President Durkin reviewed past committee actions in response to concerns regarding how the committee can be sure that the board actions are followed up on and that they are achieving the desired results. The committee reviewed a schedule of tracking to follow up the actions required by the committee and discuss the items that will come before us in 2007. A copy of that matrix is in your folders. Regent Conley Kiesler indicated that she has requested a similar tracking mechanism to ensure audit recommendations are implemented at all of our campus level. Thank you, and back to the chairman.
Thank you. The committee then sort of used this as a bridge to talk a little bit about goals and priorities for the remainder of the year. And I would encourage my colleagues, as Regent Rosenzweig has suggested, to take a look at your leisure at this matrix, because it does identify a range of things that at least the Business, Finance, and Audit Committee has done well before the tenure of many of us on the board, and it provides a bit of a roadmap in terms of at least our committee and ultimately the board efforts to try to sort of be accountable for our decisions and take a look at on a periodic basis what the impact of those decisions have been. For example, differential tuition, which is a significant issue on many campuses. Many campuses have implemented a variety of differential tuition programs. I think it's important periodically, and I think the committee believes it's important, and I hope the board believes it's important, to look at the impact of those policies and what they've had. The non-resident tuition, which is an issue which has had some considerable public attention over the last year, is one that necessitates, at least at some point, and certainly I think that Vice President Durkin made a very persuasive argument that the appropriate time to look at that is more likely to be in the fall or winter of this year, not today, just to enable the campuses to have a full period to promote that policy. But all these issues are issues that at least the committee believes we should take a periodic look at. And as I say, this matrix provides you a sort of a timeline of what the agreement was when those programs were approved, and any comment and ideas from other members of the board on these issues, I know would be welcomed by all of us. Vice President Durkin then reviewed a document by the Association of Governing Boards of Universities and Colleges, which pointed out key responsibilities of finance committees, including our responsibility to keep the board fully informed of the institution's financial condition, which we will do our very best to do. We discussed several types of financial information that could be presented to the committee to assist in meeting those fiduciary responsibilities. Vice President Durkin introduced Julie Gordon as the new Director of the Office of Operations Review and Audit. Julie came to us from the Legislative Audit Bureau, where her primary responsibilities included managing financial, compliance, and management audits related to higher education. Vice President Durkin commented that in his State of the State address, Governor Doyle announced that he plans to invest an additional $225 million in state funding for the UW, financial aid, and the Wisconsin Covenant. $44 million of the funding is for financial aid. Ms. Durkin reported that the DOA Secretary recently issued a memo which said that the state needed to take 2 steps to reduce spending in the current fiscal year to fund cost overruns in 4 programs. These include savings from efficiency measures included in 2005 Wisconsin Act 25 and requiring a 2% lapse for larger state agencies. For the UW system, the amount of the required lapse will be $2.9 million. Lynn Paulson, Assistant Vice President for Budget and Planning, provided an update on the state's Minnesota Reciprocity Agreement. This agreement is negotiated by the Higher Education Aids Board, which is under the leadership of Connie Hutchison. We as a board have no direct responsibility in the system. The UW system has no direct responsibility in the negotiation of this agreement. But obviously, as some of you have read press reports, this is an issue of considerable importance to thousands of Wisconsin families whose children attend a Minnesota university. So we, on behalf of the board, I'm sure the board probably as a whole, will be interested in closely monitoring the developments of the conversations that are occurring between Minnesota and Wisconsin. Vice President Durkin reported that as of December 31st, there is actually an estimated utility surplus of more than $9 million for the current fiscal year. However, this estimate was done before Wisconsin began to resemble the over the last 2 weeks, so we're suspecting that $9 million is going fast. The committee then recessed into closed session for trust fund matters, and Mr. President, back to you for the business finance.
Thank you. We have a question.
Thomas,
Just if you could give us an update on where we are on implementing the audit recommendations for more student involvement in setting segregated fees for certain subjects, blah, blah, blah.
Yes. I believe next month, is that next month we are to hear back on the follow-up, and we'll be reporting that. We'll discuss in the committee. We'll be reporting back to the board.
Regents, back.
I wanted to briefly just ask Chuck about the matrix you talked about. I didn't really focus the way I should have on the first part of it, but my question, which may be related or may not, is there any systematic way that we are reviewing practices and policies within the system that are of the type that were somewhat controversial, whether they were the housekeeper for the chancellor or the president or whatever? Is there any ongoing analysis of things that may just have grown up over the years as practices that today might not be as well accepted, that the committee does or the auditors do, or in a systematic or periodic way? Things have a way of evolving in any organization. Sometimes they aren't viewed as important enough to be highlighted at a particular moment, but over time they just are out of sync. I just wonder if there's any way we do that.
It's a very good question. Such a good question that I'm going to ask President Biden.
Thank you, Chairman Pruitt. And I'll say a few words, and I think Vice President Durkin may may want to speak, and also Regent Conlon-Kiesler. We do have a process by which the committee, working with the auditor and Regent Conlon-Kiesler, is, as vice chair of the Business, Finance, and Audit Committee, is the designated region liaison to our auditor, develops a slate of audits in areas to be looked at going forward. And that's really the place where we try to put into that slate the kinds of issues that people think of that may need going back and looking at, or issues perhaps that haven't been looked at but might be in a category of things that are, shall we call them, the ticking time bomb. Yes, it is. But let me ask Regent Durkin to give you a little more detail on Regent Durkin, Vice President Durkin, to give you a little more detail.
Thank you. In addition to what President Riley just outlined, the audit committee usually develops an annual plan of a list of things to be reviewed, and Ms. Gordon has a lot of ideas about some new areas based on risk assessment that she would like to pursue. Two other activities that are going on. General Counsel Brady's office has done an extensive review of the board policies, and will be coming to you with some suggested changes, renumbering, organization of those policies. And a couple of years ago, we did an extensive review of all of our internal financial and administrative policies, and we tried to do that on a periodic basis, usually based on input from the campuses where policies are, just no longer valid. But several of them, we look at on a regular basis to make sure that they're current and up to date and still relevant.
I would simply add, I think that one of the things we've seen, and I think Regent Loftus kicked us off on this fairly early. I mean, I think the robustness of the audit process that has sort of been regenerated in the last, particularly the last, given Regent Conlon-Kiesler a lot to do, but I think is a very positive, sort of relates very directly to those sorts of questions.
And we are in the process of actually developing a more detailed matrix of all the audits, because we do lose them. Something happened 2 years ago, I'm not thinking about it anymore, it's over and done with. But when we've asked the campuses particularly to take on some new policies regarding a specific audit, we're definitely going back and checking, and now we're going to put that in place. So I think actually at the March meeting, we should have that to all the regions to kind of show those audits, and we will go back and look.
Quickly, has the idea of discussing further independent auditor been foreclosed, or is that still a possibility in the future?
As President Walsh would say, it's certainly open for discussion.
There hasn't been any further discussion.
There hasn't been any further.
We can certainly. Any other questions? Report concluded. Regent Shields on the report of the Fiscal Planning and Funding Committee.
Thank you, President Walsh. And I must say that I did not receive Regent Salas's sports report for this morning. So, the Fiscal Planning and Funding Committee convened, and the minutes of the December meeting were approved. The following resolutions were unanimously approved by the Fiscal Planning and Funding Committee, and now are presented as consent agenda items. Resolution 1-3C, brought by UW-Madison, requesting authority to lease warehouse space. Resolution 1-3D, which is a request from UW-Oshkosh to sell a parcel of land to the City of Oshkosh. Resolution 1-3E, requests authority to exchange a parcel of university land for a parcel of the campus will use as a future building site. Resolution 1-3G, requests authority to construct maintenance and repair projects at 5 of our campuses. Some of those projects include elevator and fire alarm system replacements, heating plant improvements, and construction of a $5 million utility corridor. These 4 resolutions were passed unanimously by the committee, and I now move adoption of resolutions 1-3C, D, E, and G.
Second. There's a motion and a second to consent agenda 1-3C, D, E, and G. Is there any request to remove any item from the consent agenda?
I have a question. I'd like to know how the physical planning's room accommodations work.
It hasn't improved. We're working on it. I'm considering it.
Okay. I'm very
Not carefully.
There'll be some surprises in my tenure yet. Is there a request to remove any item from the consent agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent agenda passes.
All right, and Resolution 13F, which requested authority to place a temporary prefabricated facility on the UW Whitewater campus and then acquire or lease the facility, was not recommended, and the campus will develop other alternatives. The committee heard a panel of 4 students who explained how capital investments in student life would improve life for students on the UW-Madison campus. Assistant Vice President David Miller reported that the Building Commission approved about $13 million for projects at their December and January meetings. The funding breakdown for those projects is $10.5 million in general fund supported borrowing, $2 million in program revenue, and $1.5 million gifting grant funds. Vice President Miller mentioned that the governor presented several 2006 design and construction awards, one of which was for excellence in architectural design for the Reuter Residence Hall at UW La Crosse. The committee adjourned to closed session and arose with no report. Mr. President, this concludes the report of the Physical Planning and Funding Committee.
Thank you.
Just one quick question.
Yes.
Just repeat, Tom, what was the purpose of the panel discussion? I didn't hear.
The panel discussion? That was, I believe, part of the presentation from the UW-Madison campus. It was on the capital investments in student life.
And that's
like residence halls and like basically the campus master plan, I believe.
So they were just talking about the facilities or the...
Regent Spector, as this was essentially UW-Madison's campus visit, the facilities division reported via 4 students on all of the various student life facilities that students are involved in, either having recently constructed or are planning for the...
So dormitories are separate home...
health services and physical recreation.
Any other questions of Regent Shields? Seeing none, we'll deem the report received. I at this time have a resolution of appreciation to the University of Wisconsin-Madison to read, and would ask that it be passed by acclamation. Whereas the University of Wisconsin-Madison makes a unique contribution to the UW system as a research-intensive institution, and the campus is committed to maintaining its reputation as an internationally recognized first-rate research university, and whereas the board was pleased to learn more about the research mission of UW-Madison, which pervades every aspect of the educational experience for undergraduate, graduate, and professional students at the campus, and whereas UW-Madison seeks to continually enrich the undergraduate learning experience by offering opportunities such as residential learning communities, hands-on laboratory research, service learning courses in the community, and independent studies under the guidance of UW-Madison faculty, and whereas Regents appreciated hearing from students about the investments that UW-Madison is making in student unions, recreational sports, student health facilities, and residence life, and whereas members of the board were impressed in November with a campus program and an outstanding musical performance by the Philo Musica String Ensemble of the UW-Madison School of Music, and whereas UW-Madison is committed to maintaining excellence and efficiency through forward-thinking, strategic decisions about resource allocation, and during institutional reaccreditation over the next 2 years, will further examine how the campus can best invest resources to provide maximal benefits to the state. Be it therefore resolved that the Board of Regents of the University of Wisconsin System thanks UW-Madison for hosting the board's February 2007 meeting and commends Chancellor John Wiley and all the campus's faculty, staff, and students for their accomplishments and contributions to the state of Wisconsin. And let the record show that we are passing this by acclamation. Are there any communications, petitions, or memorials? Is there any unfinished business?
Well, just in the memorial area, if you read the New York Times today, you'll see that Nelson Polsby passed away. He was one of the most brilliant political scientists ever produced in this country or any other country, and he was on the faculty here in the 70s. And
Got a Nobel, didn't he?
he won pretty much every political science prize there was. A great friend of Wisconsin
And a relative of Toby Markovich.
Oh, really?
A relative of
Toby Markovich.
I thought I read in the paper where somebody died who went to school here who received a Nobel. Begin with a Mick.
Political scientists don't get Nobel Prizes.
He wasn't Irish, I can tell you. All right. Any other unfinished business? Well, I am going to read a motion. I hereby move that we move into closed session to consider a student request for Regent review of a UW-Milwaukee decision as permitted by Section 19.85, Parent 1 and a Parent F and a Parent Wisconsin statute.